psychologist friend of Stan's over at the left that he apparently brought that day. I didn't know about this picture until my daughter discovered it online. It's if you go to Stan Groff's website, you'll see it in his gallery. The next picture that he's got, it's the first one. Because I think at this point he couldn't go back to Czechoslovakia. The next picture is a picture of him with a psychiatrist named Fritz Perls, a notorious psychiatrist who I could talk about some other time. So I'm just going to hit some highlights here. This is a group that doesn't need to know the history of psychedelics. That's well known, I think, the Eleusinian mysteries, the allegation. I'm a philosopher by training. Some people claim that Plato got his idea of the theory of forms from his experience with this, perhaps a version of ergot. I'm a skeptic. But it is true that in a dialogue, a Platonic dialogue that you will read in graduate school if you have the misfortune of trying to become a professional philosopher, the Phaedrus, in which there is a mention of the most blessed of mysteries which we celebrated, and so on and so forth. Pretty much, I think every adult male in Greece who could get at one point in his life, and perhaps the women as well, but we don't really have any evidence of that, could have this experience once in his life, would try to do this. But we don't really know very much about it, and I don't think it's the basis of Plato's philosophy in one way. And of course, then we have so many moments that one could mention over the years. This Confessions of Opium Eater, which was quite fascinating to my favorite philosopher and psychologist, William James. I teach William James in my classes whenever I can. His textbook, The Principles of Psychology, published in 1890, actually shaped neuroscience and still shapes neuroscience. The stream of consciousness, neuroplasticity, these are still metaphors that people use in neuroscience. Neural networks pretty much comes out of William James. It's all there. In fact, I have to say, I'm going to sabbatical next year, but when I get back, I want to tell the History of Science department that I want to teach a seminar on modern neuroscience, but through the principles of psychology. So my plan is to do an hour on principles every week, and then the second hour have the neuroscience and talk about that idea, like the stream of consciousness, how it is viewed today in science. So he's doing a 2021 scientific course. But he was also particularly interested in psychical research. He himself was interested in cocaine, like everybody else was in those days. Freud was actually probably addicted to cocaine for a while. And it was apparently in Coca-Cola. Somewhat controversial history. And of course, I don't have to talk to you about Dr. Hoffman. You will, again, I'm just hitting the highlights here so that I can tell myself I have. 1938, and 1943, the 25th construct. I have tried desperately to find a tax stamp that my father had in the early 1960s that was in his office, under clear tape. The tax stamp read, I swear to you, cocaine, marijuana with an H, and LSD 25. As a psychiatrist, he was entitled to order these substances, to have them. They were not illicit at that point, but he could get them from various labs if he wanted them. And I've gone on eBay many times, hoping that somebody would put out an image of that tax stamp so I could put it in my show. And found it. But I know what he's doing. So I'm going to spend most of my time, though, on LSD. It's the iconic drug. And perhaps the first time that the national security world, I do talk to the national security people about various things, perhaps the first time the national security world was interested in something like brainwashing or mind control was in this show trial of Cardinal Argenti in Budapest in 1949. He looked very odd. The suspicion was that he was on something. Perhaps it was this relatively new drug, LSD. People weren't sure. In fact, the Czechs, and we'll come back to this, were very interested in LSD. This part of the world, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, was quite advanced in what we might call psychochemicals in the 1950s. This is a long-term follow-up of what was actually Stan Groff's study at Charles University in the late 50s and early 60s with psychiatric patients using LSD. And this is the first page of Stan's summary of 7 years of LSD research at Charles University. This was published in 1964. I found this with a colleague on another project while we were in Prague 3 years ago. I don't know that anybody else has a copy of this. I've been trying to find somebody who would translate this whole 126 pages for free. There are very few Czech translators who work for free. I'm here to tell you, most of them work for banks. This is the first. This is the table of contents. It just goes on for 125, 126 pages. And I don't know that even Stan, who I've been in touch with over the years, I don't even know if he knows that I have this. There was one copy, one physical copy supplied on the shelves. What's called the NIH in Prague. And this is the image that appears inside the front cover. This was a fairly common, what should I say, exercise that people did with people who were mental patients who were on LSD at that time. They do some drawings. So I think it's quite dramatic and interesting to see. Probably not so different from what perhaps your patients or clients are doing these days if you ask them to. I don't know. But anyway, it's a very dramatic illustration, four senses in one, of how advanced they were. Somebody supposedly once said facetiously, everybody up to the current age was an idiot. Not at all. Actually, there was a lot of interest, and there were some systematic efforts at that time. Interestingly, one thing we learned from having a translator read some of this document to us, which is again 964, is that all of the psychiatrists were obligated to have 5 LSD experiences themselves. And I believe this is because they were coming out of the second movement, where everybody had to have their own training analysis in those days. So everybody had to have the experience, of course. I don't know what the professions would say now about that. I think probably if you went to the Penn IRB, said that you wanted to do a psychedelic study and you wanted to do it on yourself, that the IRB would probably not respond favorably. In fact, they might call a psychiatrist at Penn and suggest that they have a consultation. But it seems to me there's a great deal of legitimacy to having a co-experience along these lines. Bulgaria also, by the way, you can find this online. Bulgarians were also interested in LSD. Apparently the Czechs made their own. Remember how I learned this? The Bulgarians ordered it from Sandoz. I'm not sure why. They had less capacity in their labs. They were also very sophisticated chemists. This is a picture of the group in Sofia. I want to spend a few minutes talking about somebody I study a lot, Henry Beecher. An unusual character to bring into a conversation like this. Henry Beecher was the first chaired professor of anesthesiology in the world. Very distinguished guy at Mass General, Harvard. He was the recipient of the Silver Star for his service in the MASH unit in World War II, actually a few units. And he wrote 3 incredibly important papers. A paper called The Power of Placebo in 1955, which really reintroduced the idea of the placebo in the medical world. In 1968, he was the chair of the committee that decided what the criteria were for brain death. So the brain death statutes that are now in every state come out of the document that Beecher chaired that committee in 1968. And a hugely important paper that you would read if you took a bioethics course with me, called Ethics in Clinical Research in 1966 in the Early Journal of Medicine, in which he identified what he said were 22 unethical studies in the published medical literature, which was the bombshell for the big breakthrough in the history of human experimental ethics in this country, that paper. So Beecher was a very interesting character. At the time that Beecher was working, there were also lots of medical research studies at Lakewood Arsenal on LSD, cannabinoids, BZ, mustard gases, nerve gases, VX, sarin, etc. And this was Beecher's era. After the war, when it was discovered that the Nazis had done mescaline experiments in a concentration camp, we wanted to know what the hell they had done. What was this stuff? Mescaline. They'd also heard about LSD that was relatively new. So Beecher was actually asked to go in and talk to people in Europe to try to find out what these psychoactive substances were about. So Beecher, because he was an anesthesiologist and knew something about the brain and had been in the military, was a war hero, he was a natural candidate to go and be the contact to understand these things. And I know you can't read this, but in 1950, Beecher writes this letter. This is then from the National technically actually at College Park, where the archives are buried. Beecher writes a letter to his handler about the people in the UK, in Germany that he's meeting who know about these drugs. This is, again, more of his reports. I think one from London. He's talking to people at Oxford, Cambridge, trying to find out about these drugs. Again, more documents. We don't have time to go through them all, but you can see it was pretty extensive. These drugs were called ecosuppressants in the 1940s, in the late 1940s. They were not called psychedelics, of course, and Huxley and others. And this is a paper, an excellent paper from a Wisconsin historian named McCoy, historian of medicine, who hates Beecher. And when I say hates Beecher, I mean he really hates Beecher. So he thinks that Beecher was basically a criminal. I'm not sure I agree with McCoy about this, but you can see that he is reporting that what Beecher said in that one of the documents I showed you before. He was telling the Army, we had a great setup to study. He was basically asking for money, which is what science professors are really good at doing. We never have enough money to do science, right? So, but LSD at this time also was an interest, legitimate interest, because we were getting to study more and more about neurotransmitters. So what's known about serotonin, to a great extent, indirectly comes out of, as David Nichols explained to us years ago, comes out of work that we've done with LSD. How are these chemicals working? What's LSD doing? We start looking more closely at neurotransmitters. So Beecher actually published 3 papers on LSD. Certainly, at least one of them with DoD funding, of course, with college students. Who else? They're available. Probably white, right-handed male students, and because you got they have a normal group, because that's the normal group, white, right-handed male students, probably sophomores, taking the class as a requirement, I had a requirement like that too. It was either that or my paper, but it wasn't LSD. So these are the 3 papers that were published in the early 1950s. Claims have been made that Beecher worked for the CIA. I've never found any evidence that Beecher worked for the CIA. But I do believe that he wanted to work for the CIA. The CIA was interested in these drugs later on in the 1950s. For some reason, I think he was pounding on their door that they wouldn't take it. And I'm not sure exactly why. I have some ideas about that for another time. So he used LSD as a control drug in his anesthesiology studies at Mass General. And a guy who was Dr. Mashur, who was an anesthesiology fellow at UVA, where I was before Penn, came to me one day, and I think it was 2005, told me about this. I didn't even know about this. He said, you study Henry Beecher as an ethicist, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, do you know Beecher used LSD in his neuroanesthesiology studies? I said, no, that's news to me. So Mashur and I kept talking about this. He's now, he's an anesthesiologist professor somewhere in Michigan, I think, perhaps, I don't remember. In any case, he published this in a very obscure journal, a book of anesthesia history, which I'm sure you can read it a lot. I've never even seen it. But it's a really cool paper, and I actually commend it to you, because it does explain a lot about why people like Beecher were interested in LSD in those days. McCoy, who I said hates Beecher, said that Beecher didn't get consent when he did his studies on LSD. I don't know if he did or not. And I'm not going to play this for you. This is because for reasons of time. You probably know the film Manchurian Candidate. If you don't, you need to watch it. I show it in my classes, or I show this next to my classes, but we don't have time for that. But this is where most Americans really learned about the possibility of using drugs to do quote-unquote mind control or brainwashing. And that's a term that came from a journalist, a big anti-communist journalist based in Florida named Edward Hunter, who published this really scary book about brainwashing. The war book you will never forget, a fascinating document. What is Hunter talking about? Well, what he's talking about is what Alan Dulles, the famous CIA director, was worried about. That our men who were prisoners of war in Korea were being brainwashed by the Red Chinese, as we used to call them. I guess they're our friends now, they call them Red Chinese. Are they friends? I can't tell. Lost track. And of course by the North Koreans. And they were concerned that they were doing brainwashing using drugs. They commissioned 2 Cornell University neuroscientists, neurologists, Wolf and Hinkle, very distinguished people, actually, to do a study. Wolf and Eco concluded, no, it wasn't those. They were just really good at putting peer pressure, group pressure to do sort of re-education. So that these men would say treasonous things. But they were interested in drugs. This is Sidney Gottlieb. Sid Gottlieb was basically the Q that you see in the old James Bond movies, except that he didn't give them a really cool car. He gave them drugs and biologicals. He tried to get, for example, a poisoned cigar to Fidel Castro. And I used to be able to say that everybody who's tried to kill Castro is dead. When I said that, I was able to say Fidel's still alive, but he's not. And he was the architect of the infamous, notorious Ultra program. And this is one of the few documents that was not sanitized in 1973. Sidney Gottlieb, they forgot to sanitize the accounting memos. So here's Sid Gottlieb signing a memo that says $39,500 for LSD research, LSD antagonists, and so forth. And we had other drugs as well. MDA experiment on this fellow Harold Flower, who died at the Psychiatric Institute, Columbia University Psychiatric Institute, New York State Institution. So there was one death. This was covered up. The death of Frank Olson, which of course you know Errol Morris did this sort of documentary narrative about the case of Frank Olson. I actually know his son Eric Olson many years ago, and we used to talk. I don't know what happened to Frank Olson. Was he dosed with LSD? Did he jump? Was he pushed? I don't know. I think he was given LSD. That is the question. Was he suicidal? Was he assassinated because he knew too much about other things? We'll never know. And this is one of the kinds of things that the CIA was doing at that time under MK Ultra. They got a sex worker in San Francisco. They got a two-way room with a two-way mirror. She dosed her John with LSD before they did whatever they were going to do to see what would happen. And they called that project Operation Midnight Climax. At least they had a sense of humor. I'm not sure there ever was a climax in LSD, but I wasn't there. So this was revealed in 1975. Senator Church and Vice President Rockefeller had commissions to study these things. This is my former boss at a think tank in New York called Hastings Center, the first bioethics think tank where I used to work. Dan Callahan, Dan was a PhD philosophy student at Harvard, but he agreed to be in what turns out to be a hitting feature experiment. He was Dan was a great swimmer. And so they recruited swimmers. And they asked them to swim as fast as they could, and they gave them speed. And guess what? They swam faster. Okay. That was 1959, 1960. Dan said he didn't really get consent. In 1974, Dan named the Ethics Award at the Hastings Center after Henry Beecher. Go figure. Was there, now the interesting thing about Beecher, although he's a hero of research ethics, he was against the Nuremberg Code. He didn't really like rigid rules to govern experiments. He thought the best protection for anybody in any experiment, including presumably psychological experiments, was the virtuous investigator. He was a virtue theorist. Now we get to Tim Leary. Think about it. Who dominated LSD research at Harvard in the 50s? Henry Beecher. Who dominated LSD research, or other things, psilocybin mostly, at Harvard in the early 60s? A young upstart named Timothy Leary. Also very interested in groups, as you probably know. Leary got his PhD at Berkeley for doing his research on groups, Leary circles. He was still sometimes referenced in group therapy research. For various reasons, he became interested in other forms of experience, and he's a fascinating character. He did the Concord prison experiment from 61 to 63, basically group therapy with and without psilocybin. Would it prevent recidivism? Well, we don't really know. Rick Doblin took another look at the data, the founder of MAPS, in the 90s, and said, I don't think so. I think Tim kind of exaggerated, kind of bent the curve a little bit when he reported it. But it's an interesting concept. It's group therapy, right, as we heard before, with a psychoactive substance. It was a controlled study. So it had some merit, and he couldn't finish it because he had to leave. You know about the Morse Chapel experiment, this created problems. If you don't know about it, you can read about it. people were running out on Mass Ave, pretty stoned, and that got too much attention. So finally they had to leave. Beecher at that time apparently was following this with some interest. And upstart Leary, he doesn't make a direct reference. I have not been able to find a direct reference that Beecher ever made to Cynthia Booth while they coexisted at Harvard. I don't know that they ever met. Maybe they stumbled on each other at the faculty club. I don't know. I would love to have been there if that happened, because I would imagine Beecher ignored him. And Leary would have very much wanted to get Beecher's approval. Beecher was a nice, important guy. But this is what Beecher had to say about these things in 1963. And of course, it's right around that time that Ramdas, then known as Richard Alpert, had to leave. He was actually fired. Leary was not fired, actually. He decided, it's not looking so good. So he decamped to Millbrook, New York, where he was working for a couple of years. But Beecher continued to follow, I think, what Leary was doing and others were doing at LSD. And he was very critical of using LSD with dying patients, as you can see. I think this is a tug of war between generations. Who really gets to control this stuff? Is it the post-war generation, the war generation, the wartime generation of Beecher, or the post-war generation of this hippie upstart, the guru of the new era, Timothy Leary? I'm not going to show you this. Well, maybe I will. You know this? How many of you have seen the quick video? I'm not even sure we have capacity for audio here. I guess we can find out. So I'm going to explain this for you if I can. If not, I'll tell you what it is. We don't have audio. Too bad. And I just lost it. So basically, what I was going to show you, it's online. If you Google LSD research on British soldiers, you'll find it. Have any people seen this? Yeah. Okay, so I show it to my students. Kind of a cheap laugh, but I like cheap laughs. Essentially, in the early 60s, the Brits were doing LSD research with soldiers. I believe this is also a U.S. and Canadian venture. What were we concerned about? Sorry, guys. What we were concerned about was whether you could dose a unit of combat soldiers with this stuff, maybe drinking water. So they gave it to them, it didn't happen, and they got very disorganized, as you would expect. So that was a whole really not all that interesting. But the other concern, and really the reason that I should mention the CIA was interested in this stuff, was that it could possibly give it to an atomic physicist with a high security clearance when he or she wasn't paying attention. And it could function as, well, in the words that were used in the 1950s, if you gave somebody LSD, you could make a discrete man indiscreet. In other words, they kind of blow the secret of the body when they were in an international meeting, having arrested its colleagues in an unsuspecting way. So, if we ever do get the slides back, I'll show you that, in fact, in the 1990s, this got the experiments of British soldiers did get to Parliament. And the Ministry of Defense did a sort of non-apology apology for a lot of them these days. They said, well, we couldn't tell them what they were getting because it was an experiment. And they would have completely screwed up the experiment. Okay? So thank you very much. So this is where I leave off. As you can see, the Secretary of State of Defense in the UK really did exactly follow. So I'm going to go quickly. I love this line from Leary. A few of us saw what was happening, and we wrestled the power of LSD from the CIA, and now the power of computers away from IBM. Leary was really into cyber at the end of his life. I don't know if you know this, but he thought that cyberspace was sort of the successor to psychedelic experience. He tried to marry together in his relationship with Ken Kesey. Story. I'm going to move quickly. Beecher is still critical of consent, now getting to the late 1960s. Still very critical of consent, he's pissed off. But I'm going to say more about Beecher. This is Beecher's title of the famous paper that I mentioned, 1966, Ethics in Clinical Research. Beecher, it turns out, had his own problems, which, as I mentioned to you, what I knew about for a while, But this is interesting because this piece of staff was published by his successor. This is the guy who had the Beecher Chair of Anesthesiology at Mass General. A very nice fellow named James Raft, very distinguished anesthesiologist. He went back into the archives and he discovered this funky stuff about Beecher and LSD. So, complicated character, Beecher. But I think quite notable in his own way. So back to some more, I'm going to end now, next couple of minutes, don't worry. There's actually very distinguished people that are part of this history that we've kind of lost. One of them is a psychiatrist, a British psychiatrist named Josh Beer. Josh Beer is actually a friend of my dad's. Beer was one of the founders of the therapy community, which you may not know much about TCs. There are still very many of them around the world. Many of them have been called on by people in the field of addiction medicine. These are essentially residential situations, therapeutic communities, try to be residential. Beer was quite interested in TCs and also became very interested again in doing studies of patients that are chronic mentally ill patients in a public hospital, a well-known hospital in London, with LSD. So this is a paper he published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine in 1960. And actually, there were dozens and dozens of papers like this, between 55 and 65, when it was legal. And it's written in this paper. Now, Beer, so this is just an excerpt. It gives an idea of the kind of thing that he was interested in. Now, Beer was a psychoanalyst. So the three cases that he talks about in the rest of his paper, which you can get online, the three cases he talks about are really cases about sexual problems. So it's not surprising, right? If you've got this Freudian background, there are going to be sexual problems. And LSD, with psychotherapy, for many of these people, he said, did create the opportunity for catharsis, which enabled them to be freed up from these problems. And this is, by the way, this started in 1952. So he did this for at least 7 or 8 years with patients in this hospital. And it's really worth reading that piece. When I got to the University of Virginia in 1997, I connected to his student, one of his proteges, Dr. Buckman. John Buckman came to the University of Virginia from London as a Beer student, a protege of Beer's in 1965. And as he told me at lunch when I got to UVA myself, 32 years later, he planned in college for to continue doing LSD research that he started with in London. Then he discovered something. LSD was gradually becoming an illegal drug. That was the end of his research. Buckman's research career ended almost as soon as he got the shot. So what did he do? He ended up running the inpatient psychiatric unit at UVA Hospital. That's what he was doing for 30 years, 30+ years. So that was the end of his career. And I guess if there's a point to this, it is people like us have to be really careful because this stuff is so sensitive. And I think there is a generational change now that should happen. The old guys are dying. The old stigma is gradually receding, but it is possible still for it to be very popular. So in that spirit, I'll just point out to you, and I'm going to end here. This is Dominic Sisti, my colleague in medical ethics here, and I, mostly Dom, have been working on ethical issues for MAPS, or the Public Benefit Corporation that Rick started. And you know, the operative question is, how can we avoid getting in hot water in the street? How can we do it right? And avoid the impressions that people have had in the past. Frankly, a lot of responsibility is theory. So you can go online and read this. This is a draft set of ethics principles for the field that again mostly Dom developed with the people at MAPS, and we can talk about this, but I think it speaks for itself. We need to have a set of standards that the field subscribes to. They're open. You can read about them on the web. We can talk about it as a community. So I will leave it there and look forward to any conversation you want to have. Thank you.
Hi. Do you think that overall overall Leary's sort of instances such as like Millbrook and like the mantra of like tune in, turn on, drop off, and other instances like that, and overall what he did was positive for the psychedelic movement, or kind of bastardized it by coming off too jarring like, to the outside world? Or do you think overall this works?
I mean, in one sense, who cares what I think, right? But it's nice of you to ask. Look, he was a huge personality. There are a lot of people like this in history. Sometimes I mean, when I talk to my undergrads, as I'm doing now, about history of assisted death, Jack Kevorkian, right? Jack Kevorkian's a guy, you needed somebody like that to take you up the hill, but you wouldn't want him to run the system on the other side of the hill. Right? So Leary, okay, well, maybe we needed somebody like that in some respects to get us to a certain point. The problem is he lived for a long time, and you know, he got involved with Weatherman, and the breakout of Folsom, and then G. Gordon Liddy. I mean, you know who G. Gordon Liddy was? G. Gordon Liddy was the assistant DA who tried to bust him at Millbrook. And then in the 70s, when I was in grad school, they go on a nationwide chat tour together, right? Because Leary needed money. He'd been in prison for so long. He was broke. So, I mean, you know, there are many aspects to these things. I mean, Leary was a really interesting character. But there are so many dimensions of his style. Somebody I didn't mention, by the way, who I would like to add to the talk, here or there, is a guy at UCLA named Sidney Cohen, who was a very distinguished psychiatrist who got into this early and kind of got nervous. He was an advocate of the early 60s. And then he got nervous when they saw, I think, what Leary and others were doing in the 60s. So, it's a, you know, it's not, you can't wrap this up in a neat bow. But, that's all I'd say. There's a pretty good biography of it that I commend to you. It's a doorstop. And it's quite interesting, including his time at you know, he's at West Point. So I grew up in West Point. And he had to leave West Point. He got the silent treatment because he kept misbehaving with alcohol. But when he finally did, in his second year, agreed to leave West Point, he said it was the only fair trial he was ever really because they let him leave without a plot in his record. Then he went to Alabama, where he had to leave. He got thrown out because he spent a night in the closed dorm. He's a bad boy. But we love him. Nice. Up to a point. Yeah. Yes.
With an experience as ineffable as a psychedelic experience, how can we ethically prepare people that are involved in these studies to be open to something like that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And also, I mean, I would say that, you know, I don't know. I'm going to tell you that. I don't know. But, because I'm going to leave it in the strings, you know, how these things happen. I don't know. I'm a philosopher. But it does raise interesting questions. It raises questions also about personal identity. Right? So if you're going into an experience intending for your personality to change, what's the status of your consent process? How does that? And I think that is really a very interesting question. But it's not only a question for psychedelics, it's a question for lots of medications, for lots of things. So antidepressants, I mean, what's personal identity? I mean, ordinary SSRIs. What does consent mean before you start a study, and during the study, and afterwards, during clinical use? And that's a good question. But the only question, I think, is it a deeper problem when you're really trying to change who you are? And I don't even know what the hell that means at a certain level. But it's a really good question. Thank you for asking. I can answer.
Hi.
Too close. Okay.
Yeah, just given the work of MAPS recently and other associations like MAPS and the re-emergence of this work, and do you know the tolerance, I suppose, of the FDA in particular as to the benefits of this work? What role do you see the likes of...
If you're downtown, you're probably really good.
What role do you see the likes of University of Pennsylvania, for example, in this? It occurs as if we're slightly behind all of this, that are behind. There's no real
Work being done here.
There's no work being done really in the universities around this. Well, there is in some, but University of
Well,
Pennsylvania.
Hopkins, Roland Griffiths was here a month ago. NYU, do I understand it? Right, UCLA. I mean,
Actually, I mean to Philadelphia for it. You know, given that Philadelphia is a medical
I would love
city.
it. Yeah, I mean, it depends, you know, who you recruit and what their interests are. But I don't, there's nothing again, in principle, that would prevent people from doing this if they wanted to do it. I mean, there's some, you know, pretty cutting edge stuff being done in transcriminal mechanics and deep brain stimulation, for example. So there's nothing, I mean, I've been here for 14 years. I feel very confident. We do extensive research. I mean, so controversy is not the issue. It just depends on who comes along, who's got that interest. And if you know somebody who wants to be independent, who's got a whole bunch of grants, it should be good. That's good, you know, it's fair to you.
Looking at the traditional use of like such drugs like in the case of ayahuasca or mushrooms or even peyote, within that ritualistic context, what do you see as anything that we could pull from that traditional framework that they use substances and such as in case of the minister being very experienced with that specific substance? But also as the ritual itself, in the case of the ayahuasca circles, they have their fasting and have like where the participants actually cook with meat themselves. So what do you see the level of integration between the traditional ritualistic to
I don't know. Not my area. I'll tell you the truth. First time I heard the word ayahuasca was probably in this room at the second India conference, what, 5 years ago. And there were a lot of people, practitioners in the room, who I heard talk. That's what I know about ayahuasca, basically. That and that the NIH couldn't use it. Actually, know through a family friend, a young man who's at Harvard in grad school right now, who did ayahuasca research in Brazil. He's taught me stuff, but I'm not the person. But I do think it's notable that they're groups, right? And I think that is, and this is sort of what was being talked about before, that the group experience is group experience. And how you manage that, set the setting, I'm not the expert. I mean, safety in groups is a problem. Safety, I mean, I've done some group therapy, and it's a huge security, confidentiality, safety, particularly when you get into action methods. Then you add this other component. You really want somebody who knows what they're talking about. They're going to be. Thank you.
As it exists, what do you think of the modern day challenges that strength
You know, Don, my colleague and I have been spending a lot of time talking about this. And I don't know what Don says. I don't know that there's anything unique except the statement, the history. I don't know that there's, I don't know that it's special. I mean, you got to do the prior review. You have a well-designed study. You have safety considerations, right? You have the consents, which are challenging, as we talked about before, perhaps. Otherwise, I just don't see anything specifically problematic, except for the appearance and the stigma, which is why people who, like me, who are in their 60s have to die. Not me, but, generational changes, there's a reason for that. So I don't, there are some unique angles to it, no doubt, but I don't think there's anything qualitative.
Was it something unique about this area that may have generated?
Oh, it was the era that I really enjoyed. As you know, since I do teach history, do science, there are social movements involved here. It's not just about individual biographies, and there are so many variables. made this happen when it did. I'll just note the CIA was first interested in this. I had the Army was seen before the counterculture was. You know, it's a million. When did Ken Kesey first have his experience at the VA hospital in Palo Alto? Right? You know, you can't make this shit up. It's incredible how many threads came together at a certain time. And then there was sensationalized. So, you know, the kid from Scarsdale who showed up in the emergency room at NYU, who was having a bad trip, right? How many other kids who were just drunk who showed up at NYU University, but it was LSD. So this got very sensationalized. There's a really pretty good, very good book by Coach Bailey, you remember? Very good book about the sensationalism associated with LSD in the press. Stormy Kent. You know, when I discovered that book a few years ago, I thought, it's 1988, how good could it be? It's actually very good, very good. And that and the other books that are mentioned here, I highly recommend Stormy Kent. I think that tells the story about stigmatization. Yes.
We're not sort of helping the faculty position that was slightly towards it, instead of, for example, John Briggs and rather than now we're helping experience healthy versus not versus peacock. We just starting around and talking students ridiculous about
Well, I won't take that personally. Well, we graduated in our so we know all about that. Probably another subject or another study. You know, yes, I know what you're talking about. On the other hand, this is the community. Right? How can you give the talk history of psychedelics without talking about it? You just can't. I just think you can't do it. It's part of the story. It's a critical part of the story. And there's something to be learned from what happened. So, yes, of course you're right. In principle, but history is what it is. I mean, along these lines, when I give talks about human experiments and ethics of doctors, sometimes they'll say, "How do you guys always talk about the Nazis?" Well, I'm sorry, but you know, this is where a lot of this shit came from. It's the reaction to the Nazi experiment. So I'm not saying Hitler was a Nazi, on the contrary, but I mean, the bad actors are a part of history.
When you mentioned SSRIs versus LSD, I mean, of course, LSD sounds like it's way more intense, but isn't it in some respects like more consensual than SSRIs? Because SSRIs have like a more generic effect on a person. I don't know, maybe this may be wrong, but isn't like LSD a more interactive experience after you have it? Is it a different the person, I guess?
I don't know. You're talking to a guy who totally dissociated with LSD in 1974 for about 6 hours. So I wasn't interacting with anybody. Or if I was, I sure don't remember. Except the people who said they got me in the subway. I'll leave that to the scientists, practitioners, people who know these things. Probably not setting it.
Well, I mean, like, with Scorpions, I mean, the whole work is something better than that.
They're very good.
Yeah. Right, oh yeah, it was just like one question about it, yeah.
Well, all right, so I mean, if you want to expand on that, so LSD, right, you want to say a lot of people kind of like deal with stuff and they're trying to, it allows you to process things that you normally have defenses of are not able to process. So that the SSRI is used to bring in your and so the things that cause you more distress, but cause you less distress, the things that cause you more joy, but cause you more less stress. And it's just trying to pull you in and have a sense of state. It's just that you're a great match to eliminate sort of the function, so you can't do things that whereas that the LSD experience might help to facilitate healing. You go through some of the same mechanisms, but it's not the concepts of the process, how far you just hold it in place and you deal with it.
I didn't know about my class, so I zoomed a little bit more than that. Yeah.
I'm glad you're here. Any question? Sure.
that's sometimes creates change. We gotta have the drug itself that does create
Conditions.
changes in brain power, which is not connected necessarily, right? They have the idea of they have changes which are already born that systemic side effects and changes the role.
So it's not linear.
And then there is this concern that behind this experience, and it's that experience for a mental, ideological, psychological experience that's where you see what's happening. And I think sometimes that's the more because with the psychiatric drugs, you don't know how your body's going to change and not sway. So there is no idea of what you're saying. There is no understanding of what you're saying.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, Victor, so you're the boss.
So one was gonna have is, doing good research and promoting good research, collecting information, disseminating information to the public, to students, faculty, is good for like promoting